From near the top of Sonoma Mountain, on the ancestral land of the Southern Pomo, two keepers of California's story come together to discuss what it means to be from, to live on, and to love a piece of the living earth. Every month, at the same time, in the same place, under a grove of ancient bay trees, Greg Sarris, author, professor, and chairman of the Federated Indians of the Great Rancheria, and Obi Kaufmann, artist, naturalist, and author of the California Field Atlas, share personal reflections of wonder and wisdom. In the second year of their investigative discussion, Greg and Obi are opening their live cast conversations to a roster of noted locals who, in their various vocations, wrestle with like themes of hope, justice, community, and ecology. Welcome to our circle. Welcome to Place and Purpose, Year 2. Wade Crowfoot is about to enter his 5th year serving California as the State Secretary of Natural Resources, overseeing an agency that decides everything from wildfire response to water management and distribution. With over 25,000 employees and a several billion-dollar budget, California's Natural Resources Agency includes 26 departments, conservancies, and commissions, including CAL FIRE, the Department of Water Resources, the California Energy Commission, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Although Wade and Obi have been camping buddies for a few years, this episode of Place and Purpose is the first time that Wade and Greg are being introduced to each other personally. The plan for today's talk is to discuss the vision and the drive that calls one to serve and to lead, and to make our way through some specific policy agendas, including the bold plan to protect 30% of California's land and waters in the next 6 years, the so-called 30 by 30 initiative.
Hey, we're here.
Yeah.
Hi, Wade. Hi, Greg.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Here we are under the trees. This is your first time under the trees.
Oh, yeah, it is. And I am so glad and honored to be here. It's amazing to be up on this mountaintop. I've seen it on the screen in your podcast, but it's a whole other thing to be here live.
Well, this is the 2nd September that Greg and I have done this. And last year at this time, we were under a heat advisory.
Yeah.
And it is a nice, cool 70.
It's wonderful. The fog was in the valley this morning. That's the great thing about being up here. You watch the fog. I'm the weatherman. I tell people if it's going to be a warm day or a cool day, but the fog was in the valley, but it rolled back quickly.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. It was beautiful coming in. I live in Sacramento, driving in. And the weather in Sacramento and Central Valley, pretty predictable.
Yeah.
But then they come in through the sort of bands of fog, and then you get out of it and go back into it. Just beautiful.
Yeah. And you've got this big valley oak in your front yard. And it's looking like it's going to be a mast year. Is that what you were saying? The acorns this year? Was it the acorns?
It was last year. Yeah.
Okay.
We were talking about just this prodigious amount of acorns dropped, and it kind of helps you understand the natural cycle to have a tree that big. Years where very little acorns, and then last year, for whatever reason, dropped a ton.
Well, the reason behind it is a burgeoning science. I mean, that is deep chemical ecology that suggests very strange things about larger patterns of arboreal growth and communication across vast areas. It turns out the trees coordinate with each other over hundreds of square miles to determine which species is having a mast year and which isn't. Like you were saying about the bay nuts last year.
Simply put, the trees talk to each other.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sure these old bays, for example, and these are females. The females are the only ones that give the nuts. Right. But this year there's not as many, but they do. It seems like they all have an agreement. Okay, this year we're going to really produce. And next year we're not, or whatever. But as I was saying earlier, this year there's not as many bay nuts, but we have a lot of oak, a lot of acorns.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and we didn't the last few years while the bays were producing.
Yeah.
The acorn trees were not. The oak trees were not as much. So maybe they were going back to an old cycle of making sure they're taking care of us indigenous people and others who care about that. The other thing I've noticed, I think the trees talk to us. I have found, not to make you feel guilty, Wade, but I don't know, but when you don't pick up the acorns and you don't use a lot of them, the subsequent years they don't produce.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Like
Well, that's
resentful old women.
But that's part of the disconnect.
Well, they work hard, and then you just don't take advantage of their. And we have fewer of the animals and things that use them too.
Yeah.
So, I think they kind of know.
Talking to us, yeah. I mean, every step we take through this leaf litter, we are breathing in hundreds of thousands of fungal spores with every breath, right? We are part of this system. I mean, the biological information that we imbibe, we actually take into our bodies and becomes part of us, has to influence our consciousness on some level.
It's like water.
It's like water.
Yes.
Or coffee.
Well, or coffee. But you are not just the stream or the river isn't just there. You are the stream and the river. You have it all in you, water.
That's beautiful.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Wade, for making the time to come on down,
True pleasure for me.
It's really a blessing for all of us. Here we are in September. The Secretary of Natural Resources, it's very possible that you could be called away to any number of climate emergencies right now, across the state. And the fact that we get to luxuriate in some, adult discourse about where we are and when we are is just such a precious thing.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you both do, both being busy, prodigious writers, leaders in your own right, actually taking time to be reflective. So much of my job always feels like nose to the grindstone. What's the issue right before me, or what's the crisis? What's the wildfire or the drought or extreme heat? So I appreciate what you do in terms of stepping back and being reflective.
Oh, that's interesting. So you guys are very different kinds of leaders, I guess, than I am, right? Like I see you both operating under this, what I've heard called like a tyranny of urgency. Right?
Urgencies.
Okay, yeah, I got to pluralize it. Yeah, that's right. And so how do you judge that, I think is some of the great stuff that I'd like to talk about here. But just like what's been going on. Wade, you just got back from China?
Yeah.
What were you doing in China?
Well, I mean, I'll say, Martin Luther King talked about the fierce urgency of now. And that was in the context of the civil rights movement. And, delay is denial. We need to move quick to make the changes we need to make. And obviously that was a different context. But I was in China for the last week. And let me tie this together. China produces almost a quarter of the world's carbon emissions. And we know that climate change is a planetary crisis. We're feeling it faster and more intensely than I think we ever thought we would in California with these climate extremes. I think we can be very proud in California, thanks to our leaders, that we have some of the most ambitious climate action policies and targets in the world, but we're only 1% or less of the global emissions. So unless we
California
is, yep.
What's the percentage for America?
It's, I think, low teens at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
And, of course, we built our economy, we built our affluence through resource extraction and a whole lot of pollution before it was recognized as a crisis. But I think the point I'll make is we need to help each other across the world, including in China, move faster to reduce our emissions. So Governor Newsom has been really clear about engaging China on climate action. They've got a set of targets. I think the world wants them to set, faster, more ambitious targets. We're really focused on implementation. How can we share what we're doing in California, help them implement what they want faster, whether it's electric vehicles or renewable energy? And we're learning a lot from them as well.
I'm so ignorant about that, about China. I understand that they've got more coal power plants than anybody else, I believe, right?
Yeah,
I think they also have
more.
Building more, and also more nuclear power plants, right? They've got that going on too, and we don't.
Yeah. So a lot of the world's economies, including China, I was in Australia earlier this year, also coal dependent. So their resource mix is heavily coal. And in China's case, they've been focused on economic growth. They have a large portion of their people who have been in poverty for a very long time. So their focus has been economic growth and energy production.
Right.
And the conundrum they find themselves in is, how do they continue to produce and expand their energy production, but actually switch the profile to ultimately carbon free. So Greg is right. They, on the one hand, they're adding coal plants. On the other hand, they've installed more utility scale solar recently than the rest of the world combined. So the whole trick with these coal dependent economies, including China, is how can we collectively help scale up these clean energy technologies such that they can more rapidly shift to them. So that's the challenge. But I'll say in certain areas, I think California can't rest on its laurels. I mean, when you travel around Beijing and Shanghai, as I did last week, you see more electric vehicles on the road than California. And you can tell because they have green plates in China. But I'd say, at times, 40% of the vehicles I saw on the road were electric vehicles.
Okay.
So yes, we're leading in California, but we have to push ourselves to do more as well.
But again, I would question the motivation there is economics. So it's much cheaper for people who don't have the same level of living that we have here. It makes more sense for them to have an electric vehicle.
Yeah, but part of that though is a government-driven thing too. So we have subsidies here in California. They have strong subsidies in China. There's a lot to be hopeful about in this fight against climate change, including the fact that these technologies like solar, like wind, like electric vehicles used to be a lot more expensive and are cheaper. Solar installed is now cheaper than natural gas. And so we know that we've got the most incredible nuclear reactor in the sky. It comes up for 12 hours a day, right?
Sure.
How can we make that shift? We can make that shift, but can we make that shift quickly enough?
Yeah. It looks like good inroads are being made economically. I wonder, looking at sheer numbers of EVs on the road in China, what that's actually demonstrating, if it's in fact dirty electrical.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a fact. No, that's a fact.
And you can really draw clear ratios between electric car usage and miles per gallon. There are places where energy is very
absolutely
cheap.
Look,
Everyone
everyone needs to move further and faster, and I would say China first and foremost. California has its legally required target to reach carbon neutrality by 2045.
Right.
So that's just in over 20 years. We're going to essentially transition the 5th largest economy in the world to be carbon neutral. China's target right now is 2060, 15 years later. Now, folks think that's too late, and I think there's an argument for that. But the point is, we all now across the world have the same target, and it's to shift our communities, our economies to carbon neutral. And what we're focused on in California is how can we help different parts of the world do that more quickly? How can we help ourselves do that more quickly?
Yeah.
And I'll say this because, you guys talk a lot about, nature. Mm-hmm. Nature's now part of the discussion, which is pretty amazing. When we talked about climate change in the past, I've been doing this stuff for, almost 3 decades. It was energy efficiency, electric vehicles, renewable energy, and that's also really important. But actually, what our scientists around the world have told us is protecting nature, restoring nature is a key part of stabilizing our climate. And so, we've got this big planetary goal of protecting 1/3 of the planet. Some say it should be more. I'd like to agree. But we have to do a lot more to protect and restore nature. So I'm hoping we can unpack that a little bit because it's been ignored in California and other places.
Well, and again, if one of the things that's so important to me with what the tribe is doing is creating these partnerships with the regional governments, state government, but certainly and also with the federal government, where we are co-managing open lands.
Yes.
Parks. In fact, the meeting I had earlier this morning was the Sonoma Land Trust. How do we partner with their land acquisitions? How can they transfer those to us or create partnerships with us to take care of those lands and restore them with traditional ecological knowledge? So that's just one model, I think. And there's been a huge interest in land back, to tribes, which I fully support. But at the same time, we can't just have those lands sitting there. They need to be maintained and restored and taken care of, because many of them have gone, as we say, Indian people, they've gone wild. It's wilderness. You've let them go. That ideological notion that environmentalists had, that if you just get land and leave it be, you can leave it be. Think about the fires.
Yeah.
But in any event, I think partnering with tribes with their resources and knowledge, partnering with federal, state, local agencies, and other groups with resources to put those resources together to create active partnerships that are actively restoring and maintaining open landscapes.
Totally agree. And Greg, your tribal government has been the leader in that. And the template that you created with Sonoma Parks and our friend Carol Hart, long before we were ever considering that at the state, remains an important template, a model. We've come to the realization that partnering with tribal leaders is not only the right thing to do, it's essential.
Yeah.
Because of course, you and other tribal communities in California have been stewarding these lands since time immemorial.
Yeah.
State government comes, in the last 172 years. There's so much we got wrong that we now need to get right. So part of this nature solution has to be driven by tribal leadership. And I'm glad that we're starting to put our money where our mouth is on that.
Yeah. And I think there's so much more to do going forward. Again, just to mention, the first with Point Reyes National Seashore.
Oh, yeah.
That's 27,000 acres.
That's incredible. Yeah.
And so we're really excited about that, and some big announcements coming up regarding the elk and fences.
Oh, that's
and
very
all
good.
that.
Yes, on the 23rd of this month, which
Yes.
is National Public Lands Day, I'll be at Point Reyes National Seashore Association's visitor center down there at Drake Sestero, I think, is where we're meeting. Check their website though, the NSRA, and I'm going to be leading a big hike down there.
Nice.
And it's a big fundraising day, and we'll be celebrating your efforts as well.
Well, I've been blown away, as somebody who is not native, who has not had connection to that tribal ecological knowledge, of just the depth and breadth of that knowledge. So Obi and I were at soon to be the newest state park in California called Dos Rios. It's at the confluence of the Tuolumne and the San Joaquin rivers. And a nonprofit named River Partners had a big vision to turn this into a sort of a managed floodplain. But then came in and said, why don't we make this a state park? And it's great for a lot of reasons, including communities around there don't have a lot of parks. But the point I'll make here is we spent that afternoon there in the winter, and they've hired a fairly young man whose family comes out of the basket weaving tradition, indigenous person, and him talking about the lands and the plants and the interrelationship between the plants.
Sedge all along the sedge beds.
Oh,
yes.
Incredible. And I've spent a lot of time with PhD biologists and scientists. We got some great scientists at the state, but that depth of knowledge of the interactivity of all the plants, just was one more example that's like, this is the ecological knowledge that we need to better manage our lands.
I love the locality that both of you are describing.
In California, you have to remember, we knew our landscapes so intimately because they were relatively small. It wasn't unheard of that a person in his or her lifetime never traveled 40 miles further from their village, from where they lived. So you can imagine, we knew where every bird, duck laid its eggs. We had that kind of intimate knowledge. We knew how to read the landscape. It was a text. We knew we couldn't fish because of the red tide and stuff, so we watched the elderberry. From the time it bloomed till the time it dropped its fruit, you eat shellfish. So everything was telling us everything. We read the landscape and saw the interrelationships between things that you might not otherwise assume there was a relationship between, unless you had observed it for 10,000 years or more.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Very good. It's incredible. I am also here in California. I'm also here on this planet. Scales of citizenship and scales of responsibility are a very interesting thing to consider. I've chosen as my vocation sort of the scale of the landscape of the political entity that is California, right? Across the California floristic province and into the deserts. My new book is about deserts. And I think the intersection between what you were talking about, energy production, and land conservation, designation, and protection through this 30 by 30 initiative, which you talked about briefly, about conserving 30% of California's lands and waters by the year 2030, is a really interesting, bold, novel, inspired idea with some ethical and philosophical problems. What is the nature we are spending in order to save the nature that we are attempting to conserve?
Yeah.
For example, the deserts. My new book is The Deserts of California, coming out next month, and we're talking about right now all of the solar fields in the desert, all of the wind farms, all of the geothermal makes about 7 megawatts a day. That's their capacity, right? And the goal, to be in line with the Newsom administration's goal, is to be able to pull 20 megawatts per day out of the desert across 250,000 new acres of solar panels. These solar panels that don't have a recycling plan, maybe have a lifespan of 50 years. There's, across the desert resource, energy conservation plan. Right? So that's the governing legislative document that gave me those numbers, right?
Yeah.
Across. So we're saving nature by spending nature. There's a lot of raised earth, isn't it? Right. So
that's a question with the desalinization plants.
Yeah.
Here's the challenge, right? Which is, there are compromises we need to make. There are tough decisions that we need to navigate, but we are in a major pickle.
We are
on this planet, and if we don't figure out a way to decarbonize our energy and transportation use very quickly, the world is going to look like a very, very different place, not only for us as the human species, but for all the biodiversity on Earth.
Oh, ain't that the truth?
And one of the principles here that indigenous people understood is sacrifice. There has to be sacrifice in order. So in this case, because of this major problem, we're asking the desert, these open spaces, to sacrifice.
Right.
We need to be humble in the face of that. Right. And again, think in those terms. I mean, because nothing's going to be free, and everything we do has an effect one way or the other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's nothing that a human does because we're living that is effect-free.
No, I agree. But I also don't want people to think that we're, the desert is a massive sacrifice zone. Obi, you mentioned this big spatial plan that we created with stakeholders, including environmental groups, to identify what are the most sensitive parts of the desert we need to protect. Yeah. And what are the areas that it makes most sense if we have to put infrastructure on to put infrastructure. And I'm a big fan of let's try to minimize our footprint in natural areas. Let's get more solar on rooftops. Let's get more solar on degraded agricultural lands.
That's that locality piece.
Yeah.
We could do 60% of our energy needs on microgrid levels with rooftop solar.
But I can tell you from where I sit, I so often encounter folks that they have this one issue, and they say, this issue, you guys are, compromising too much on this issue.
Yes.
And the challenge is, we're managing this massive transition, and we're trying to do this in a way that's respectful of our biodiversity, which is world renowned, the reckoning that we have with tribal communities and governments, and the need to really redress historic wrongs, and at the same time show the world that we can actually transition the economy as quickly as we need to.
Yes.
And there's a lot of room for improvement. I'll be the first one to say, but we are trying to balance all of these at the same time.
The trying is what's so important.
The trying. So okay. So the sacrifice,
yes.
that I'm unconvinced that we're going to drive our way out of the problem. I've been so moved by Cobalt Red. Have you seen this book, Siddhartha?
I love Obi's box of books. Yes. He's always got them, right?
Siddhartha Kara, Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives.
Yeah.
Cobalt.
Rare earth materials.
Cobalt in every single lithium battery. It's slave labor. Is this not...
Yeah. No, that's
not
heavy.
Slavery in the 21st century? Is this not colonization? And this is what our industry is based on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
let's children dying in the process.
Oh God, it's mind-boggling.
Right.
It's
and let's figure out
mind-destroyingly unjust.
No, I mean, there's so much to be discouraged about, honestly, but let's figure that out. One thing we're doing in California is developing lithium, which is a rare earth mineral in the Imperial Valley. And we're blessed with a resource of lithium that we can extract via geothermal. We want to do it the right way. So California leaders, governor, legislature, for the first time, put an excise tax on lithium we're going to produce, 100% of which stays in Imperial County. which is really important because that's one of the poorer areas of the state.
That's right.
So like, let's figure out how to make these moves that we need to make, but do it in a more conscious, in a more equitable way than we have in the past.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
With minimal sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Equity, and there's different kinds of equity. There's ecological equity too, which is the 30 by 30 plan is very robust, and I've studied these documents pretty intensely now. We've got it's also I think one of its big problems is probably between quantity and quality.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just about land space. The desert is doing 43% of the heavy lifting now, as far as
Right.
saving 30% of, or protecting 30% of California lands writ large across the landscape. But there are things like conifer forests.
Yeah.
18.5 million acres as they're categorized in 30 by 30. That doesn't really talk about the nature of logging in the redwood forest, which is a much smaller percentage that isn't needled out, in exactly the way I imagine, and I've talked to many foresters and climate scientists who agree with me here, the way that I imagine would really benefit the state's goals if the goal is protecting biodiversity as it espouses. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. One is, we know that reduced habitat is one of the major stressors on California's biodiversity. So we need more habitat. And I do think the 30 by 30 goal is a good target, in part because questions around biodiversity have been very hard to distill and make into a clear, measurable target.
That's true.
So we've done this, and now we're challenging ourselves. What it means is we have to protect almost 7 million more acres of land than currently protected in the next 7 years. And I can tell you, because it keeps me up at night, that is a stretch goal. We have to double the amount of our coastal waters that are durably protected for ecological benefit. So that is a distilled goal. And Obi, I'll agree with you that it's not just about the acres for the acres benefit. In other words, we're not looking for just the cheapest, easiest acres. They have to be distributed across sensitive ecosystems. Now that's mind-numbingly complex, because we're talking about biodiversity and difficult. But I'll agree that we're trying to do that. So we will have failed if we get to 30 by 30 and we've protected a bunch of ecosystems that already were in pretty strong condition, and left most vulnerable are certain ecosystems, certain areas of the state, certain species that need that habitat connectivity or need that habitat range. So we're trying to do both, and we are thankful that folks are being patient with us, and the scientific community is really leaning in to help us understand where.
That's interesting. If I could pull back a little bit and talk about leadership style, because I really admire both of you, and I think this is why I am so personally and intellectually attracted to both of you, is that I know you both to be very, how shall I say, sort of incorruptible in your earnestness of investigation. You both have this very keen mind for nuanced understanding of the bigger picture, which is something that I don't necessarily have. I could feel that in myself. I could feel that in my own voice. But
you wouldn't be sitting here
those,
if you didn't.
negotiating those hierarchies. Well, I'm happy to almost be like an echo or a call to your response, or a response to your call. Like Greg, you've talked about how over the past 3 decades, how you've made decisions for your people here locally, and you've given everything. Like, when I guess the point is, like, when does the job become a calling, become your life? Like I see you taking on more responsibilities now. You're one of the regents of the UC Berkeley. You head up the
entire system.
The entire system. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, but again, just a moment before I answer your question,
please.
With Wade, the opportunity with UC to work on the 30-30, our scientists and all of that. So all of these new opportunities or jobs that I get, I take them because they're become an opportunity to do more of what I've been doing and connect with more people about what I've been doing.
I see.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the reasons I do it. But I'll give you the heady response. I mean, I go back to Mabel McKay, from whom I've learned everything that I think, most things that I think are significant or important. And she said, I didn't want to be an Indian doctor. And, you know, she was the greatest California Indian basket weaver we've ever had. She said, I didn't want to be an Indian doctor or a basket weaver. She said, I wanted to drink wine and chase boys around the train station like the other Indian girls. But she said, I was cut out different. And the Spirit told her, that's what you're going to do. That's what your purpose here is, or I'm going to take your life. I'm going to get rid of you. And I feel in the same way that with whatever gifts or whatever I have, that's what I have to do. It is my life. It is that kind of commitment. She said to me when I was a young man, you know, as I told you before, she said, with all, and this goes into how I think about my leadership, with all I've taught you, and yet with all the difficulties you've had and the pain in your life, you have two choices. You can let that pain and difficulty open holes in your heart, and you can poison yourself and hate yourself, and you can poison and hate other people, or you can take all of that and doctor. What's it going to be? You already got hate. That's easy. Try the other. And she said, you're going to be cut out different. You're going to do this. And so when I look back, not that I wanted to do it necessarily, but I look back and I think, with all the opportunity I've had knowing her and seeing the pain of my own people, my own family, with so many in prison, my father dying of alcoholism at 52 before I even had a chance to meet him. I mean, all of these things, and with what I've learned about the earth and about all of these sorts of things, you have a responsibility to take what you've experienced and learn and transform it into medicine in everything you do.
It takes my breath away.
The
motivation, the ambition, the drive, such that if I don't do it, I will die.
Well, another not quite a severe way to put it, Obi, you don't have children. I don't know if you do, Wade, but you have one. But imagine what you would do to save your child's life. That's how I work from. Imagine your partner or things like that, the things you love, what you would do to enhance his or her well-being. That, you know, that's what it is. I mean, and when it comes to the life of trees, the life of plants, the life of your people, nothing should stop you if you love them.
Yeah.
Nothing can stop you, because if you see the trees, the world drowning, you're going to, unless don't have a full commitment or love, you're going to jump in that river to pull them out.
Yeah.
You know, I got to say, the single most profound part of my job has been working with tribal governments and tribal leaders. And it moves me to just understand the loss that was perpetuated by, the government now that I hope to represent. And I could get into that. But what I'll say is the resilience and the patience and the open-heartedness that tribal leaders have working with the state and federal government, given this history, has been just impactful to me. And, I see what you're doing, Greg, and what so many of your colleagues are doing that are leading other tribal governments. And it is astounding what's happening. And I do think we at the state government have turned a major corner where we're finally an ally in that. And I say an ally because it's really the tribes that are leading this effort. And I'm committed to running as far and as fast as we can to continue to, support that tribal leadership. I think it's going to be one of the single most important things that comes out of Governor Newsom's administration.
I think that is so noble, so inspiring.
And by the way, I got to shout out to him. I feel his commitment. I've had a very good relationship with him, and I feel the man means what he says. Here. He really does.
Well, Greg, I can say, the single most important day, I'll say of this job, but probably in my career, is when he invited tribal leaders under that centennial oak at the site of the future Native American Heritage Center at the confluence of the Sacramento American rivers, and did what no other governor had actually done yet, which is issue a formal apology. And beyond that, he read the text of the inaugural address of the first governor that essentially institutionalize this genocidal policy, putting a bounty on the head of women and children. And
the first federally financed vigilante groups, he got the money. The first governor got the money for that.
Yeah.
And he also enacted the first piece of legislation in the state of California, which was the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which legalized Indian slavery and was not repealed until 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War.
So that's our state's origin story.
Yeah.
And that is not the story that my child is learning in fourth grade.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate that, and incredible legislative leaders, et cetera, on this around like, no, we're going to actually redress this. And we're not going to do it overnight, but we're going to acknowledge the past. And then we're going to try to figure out how do we institutionalize the tribal partnerships, Greg, that you talked about, ancestral land return where possible. Again, just righting these wrongs. It's powerful.
I just do want to take a moment to shout out my own people's resilience. We're comprised, the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria are comprised of Southern Pomo and Coast Miwok, which were collected as survivors when our rancheria was established in the early part of the 20th century. But at the time of contact, there were approximately 20,000 of us here living in separate nations and so forth. And today, all of the 1,500 and I think 37 enrolled members trace our ancestry back of one of 14 survivors, wow. All of whom were women, all of whom were concubines or wives of early Americans or Mexicans. Yeah. Talk about resilience. And if those women, my grandmothers and those ancestors, went through what they went through to get me here, and I survived, that's another thing that must drive me. I cannot be lazy. It must have been easier for a lot of them to have jumped off a bridge than to keep going. And they did, and they passed down the knowledge and the languages and the things that we still have. And this, I tell our story because it's really exemplifies what happened, unfortunately, in so much of California. And us as Indians with our opportunities, we can't say, okay, it's us versus them anymore. We have to do what our ancestors did. Take the high road, realize we're all in this together, and teach. And again, with anger and all that sort of thing, and some tribes maybe with resources say, well, I'm going to keep the money, I'm going to be greedy or whatever. We can't do that. We can't replicate the sins and the patterns of colonization. We must transform them.
And it's amazing. We're learning. I mean, state government is learning. You think about our work on wildfire over the last few years. There's been this paradigm shift toward managed fire, which of course is a cultural practice California Native Americans have been practicing for thousands of years. 10, 15, 20 years ago, CAL FIRE and other state authorities would not be fully embracing that. And now we are, and we really are working to learn. There's a ton more progress we can make in terms of active learning. But I will say, Greg, that I feel like we have that message, and every day, every week, we're learning.
Let me pitch something. I think it'd be great to somehow. This morning I've been pitching all kinds of things, Ovi, so I've got Wade here. So we can talk to the governor about this. But I'd really like to put something in place now so that we could perhaps at least have a forum or institutionalize in some way a program or process by which tribes can partner with state parks.
Yeah.
Let's get that happening. Let's reach out. Let's just not wait for Grayton to come and say we want to do Willow Creek or something like that. Let's do something together so it's institutionalized. And again, that would be a way to not just to call attention to these lands, but to begin to partner to restore the parks.
I love that idea. And I like the idea of institutionalizing it. You know, we've got real points of progress led by your government, but also other parts of the state. I think about the North State, Humboldt Redwood State Park, where there's a co-management agreement with the Yurok tribe. And, you know, it used to be years ago, but not that many years ago, when in order to perform ceremony or to gather, which the tribe had been doing for thousands of years, it needed a permit from state parks. And insult to injury, in some cases, its members actually had to take a course on environmental sensitivity of I mean, can you imagine? So
Great irony, isn't it?
Yeah, incredible irony. So shift that. Co-management agreement now in place. One of the most sacred place for the Yurok people is a place that we know as Stone Lagoon. That visitor center is now managed and totally staffed by Yurok members. A total overhaul of the history, which had completely ignored the cultural history of the peoples up there. Anyways, but the point I'll make, Greg, is points of progress, but I really like your idea of institutionalizing it so other tribes understand how they can do such things.
And that there is a blueprint in place to do it.
Yeah.
And that went, and again, as I was said in an earlier meeting with the Sonoma Land Trust, otherwise, if you don't begin to institutionalize something, talk gets lost.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you got leaders like yourself, I'd say like Governor Newsom, who are committed to this, but, we're all transitory.
Yeah.
And so we're going to leave, some of us are going to leave earlier than others.
That's what I'm taking from this, like listening to you guys talk about systems of community, really, which is interesting. I talk with a lot of scientists, and I talk with a lot of foresters, I talk with a lot of rangers, I talk with people on the ground that have a lot of prescriptive solutions about what we should be doing, right? And you guys haven't talked about anything like that. And I think that's really fascinating that no, what we're talking about is building the space, building the institutions, the structures where the experts, where the people with real world experience, real time experience can come and figure this out. Then I think that's a leadership style that I see in both of you, which is fascinating to me, and quite frankly, a relief.
Well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Greg, I don't know if you feel like this, but to achieve these paradigm shifts, it's not only about a good idea, it's about the sort of the political space to explore that, but then also, institutionalizing it into law, into policy. And, so I appreciate the idea, people, because they're important. But I think when you get in these leadership positions, you realize unless you have that space, but also those tools to institutionalize, what we're talking about is nice, but probably not durable.
Wade, you said it all right there, because that's the journey of what I've learned. I've been an academic, so I know how ideas are great ideas. I've been in political groups where you try to put them through. The end goal will always be, and I hate to even use this word, but to institutionalize or in some ways commemorate whatever you need to do, a process by which the great idea continues to be applied in actuality.
100%. Because you think about any of this durable changes that we're making, it's to embed it so it moves beyond on leaders. And that's what law is all about. That's what policy is all about. And
ultimately that's what democracy is all about. One of the great resources I think that is so endangered really across the popular political sphere is this idea of the loyal opposition, right? Like I may disagree with you, but we're in this together. You see that really a lot with red versus blue versus red kind of situation. Where that is like we hear madness that I believe is wholly undemocratic to say things like national divorce and that kind of thing. It's like no, we have to have this plurality of opinions and this conflict because we're operating inside of an incredibly complex system. And to say that I have the prescriptive truth to solving this or that problem it's not how democracy works. It's also not how science works.
Well, not to bottom line or simplify this in any ways, Obi, but the problem today is you have two different sets of realities in government, in here, and two different sets of facts. And so you've got a group over here that agrees on this set of facts, and a group over here that agrees on this set of facts. when we go back to the Reagan era, we all agreed on the facts. We disagreed on how we dealt with them.
Totally agree.
So that's the big problem today.
That's so interesting. I have a little bit of a different take. Let me hear what you think about this, because I am seeing something. Wade and I were talking a little bit about this before we began today. It's like I grew up in the 80s with my bike and the creek. That was reality. Those were my facts. That was my whole environment. That was my whole world. Now the children, oh, everybody younger than me is a child, don't have a phone in their hands. They have an environment, right? That is molded by social media and video games and more nefarious edges of the internet, shall we say? And that presents a reality that in itself is not real. Like when reality, you said two different realities, but then there's like this third thing where like reality itself isn't real. All of this two-dimensional experience as opposed to what I had in my psychological development, which was three-dimensional immersion in this natural world. This came out of Wade talking about this thing he's got with REI. What is it called?
It's called Outside in 5, and REI as a company, as a co-op, actually is really leaning into a big federal effort to ensure that 100 million people that don't have access to open space in their communities actually can get outside within 10 minutes. And so they're supporting a bill called the Outdoors for All Act in Congress. I think is a great idea that provides continuous appropriation or continuous funding into a program to build parks in underserved communities and get people outdoors. But just to follow this, and we can go down a rabbit hole, obviously, in this polarization, but I do think...
Yeah, why don't you go back to that?
I'm with Greg in the sense that, in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, again, there was strong differences of opinion in terms of where our country should go, but it was based on some common, shared
Consensus
reality.
of fact.
Yeah, and now what we've emerged into such a dangerous place where people actually don't agree on the facts. Blue is red, red is blue, and that's a real challenge. At the one hand, what do we do to, yes, there's always been disagreement, but how do we start to bring people together?
One of the things that, and I really love the challenge to talk about people that have another factual world from me, because there is something. We all want to take care of our kids.
Yeah.
We all love our families. You all want to eat. We're all afraid. And so when I talk to a lot of these people, I always start on that, how are your kids? What's happening with your kids and all that? There are commonalities that are human, even if the world what we believe about the world is completely different. So I just want to make sure I differentiate, because there's the world of the phone that you're talking about, but each group and each reality can go in 10 minutes out to nature, but they're still going to be seeing things differently. Right. So that's, you have to take that into, so where at the table do you come together?
Yeah.
And it's got to be something that's very basic and human. As Joan Baez said years ago, a rubber hose feels the same way to a capitalist as it does a communist.
Yeah.
So, how do we find a way to talk to people?
Yeah. That I think that's 100%, and just reflecting on China, we have our countries have such massive geopolitical tension right now, obviously. And you get over there and what you realize is, there are Chinese environmentalists who I had spent time with who are working just as hard, who care just as much about saving the planet as we do. And it's that human to human connection that's going to evolve into work. On, even in a place like California, something that our state leaders are doing, certainly Governor Newsom driving it, is service. So the idea that actually if people come in service to their community around some things that are not political, that's a way to start to rebuild some social fabric. So you might not know that California's got service programs between this thing called College Corps and Climate Corps and Jobs Corps that is actually almost double the size of the Peace Corps, the internet, the national program.
Sure.
Meaning, one way to more connection within and across communities is getting people to actually serve their communities, particularly young people.
Well, there's a kind of as I'm listening to us, I'm thinking about our basket weaving classes at the tribe and our language restoration. And you have people in there, tribal citizens, who are Jehovah's Witness, born-again Christians, different kinds of things. But notice they're coming together over the basket weaving, the language, the land thing. So there's things that are bringing us together, even though in many ways we have very different beliefs.
Yeah.
And so we can't stay with the fight up here. We have to find a way to bring us together down here in the very human things.
I totally agree. In the environmental realm, we've worked to, strengthen connections with people who hunt and fish, for example, recreationally. I mean, our Department of Fish and Wildlife actually oversees, hunting and fishing, and sometimes there can be cultural conflict from who you consider like a dyed-in-the-wool Bay Area environmentalist and, a hunter who's hunting, deer up in the Sacramento Valley. But in fact, both want to maintain a healthy environment, both want to get outside. And so
both want those animals present.
Yes.
Yeah. I find that a lot in the land trust movement.
Yeah.
I do a lot of talks and presentations and events with land trust. The beginning of November, I'll be down in the Mojave Desert Land Trust in Joshua Tree, which is one of my favorites and one of the most really fecund and really expert at what they do, which is acquiring inholdings, cleaning them up, and returning them to a native space.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter what political party you're in. It's from the left and the right under that building doing that work together because nobody wants to see their homeland degraded ultimately.
Yeah.
And so that the more commonalities there. And I wonder too, exactly, we're being torn apart by the idea that there are different facts on some level, on a popular level. I wonder if it has nothing to, unity has nothing to do with facts. The idea that we're telling a better story, not making a better argument, seems like the most apt place to go in this so fractured culture is California in the 21st century.
Well, I will say what Greg said resonated with me, which is really tap into people's values. Mm-hmm. And the value is, family, safety, community, land. So to your point, you could sit there and argue about facts, right? A lot of people spend a lot of time doing that. Or you can really try to connect people on values. Mm-hmm. And that's not a silver bullet, but just trying to step back from, just the heady, intense debates and really say, okay, what are we trying to build? And I think, our leaders talk a lot about it, safety, community, everyone wants to be, right.
Now, you went to Australia too.
Yeah.
And now, Australia and China, do they have something like 30 by 30s going on too? Or is it taking...
Yeah, Obi, the whole world signed up for it. That's the amazing thing that people don't know. In Montreal last year, we were with a delegation of about 50 from California, and we witnessed almost the entire world, essentially, on paper, signing up to protect 30% of their lands by 2030. Now, our goal is to make sure that that's not paper protection, that's actually not protected across the world.
It has to be a culture of protection too. We don't want to be in 2031 saying, "There, we did it.
Yeah,
nature's saved."
Yeah, but I mean, it's really also a different
do.
reality. I mean, we met there's an international meeting organized by the UN. We met with representatives from Gabon. Gabon has one of the most beautiful biodiverse rainforests in the world, and what they said is, they're every bit as environmental as us, but they have a different economic reality. So, they were saying, hey, how can you help us protect our rainforest? So from my perspective, in California, what we want to do is show that it's possible, show that we can have a really strong definition of what it means to be protected, and then go out there and spend, we just allocated over the last few years $1 billion for this, which includes a lot of work with tribal governments. So we want to show that this can actually get done. And we want to, and we're bringing in, a diverse group, whether you're ranchers or hunters or fishermen or ecologists, and saying, we all want this to happen. We don't have to agree on every specific reason why we want it to happen.
Or that it has to happen right now. That's the other big problem.
Yeah.
Everybody, a lot of the radical environmentalists want things, again, Point Ray is get out all the cows right now. Well, there'd be huge problems, fire problems, for instance, if you were to do that.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Because the grasses down there that would come up are not the indigenous grasses anymore, and they're more flammable. So this has to be a cooperative, thoughtful process as we move forward.
Yeah, it has to be a transition, and I think that's hard for people.
Yes.
Same sort of thing on the energy. We've got 57% of our state is carbon-free energy right now. We need to move to 100. We've got that as a law. Yeah. And folks would like us to move faster than we're doing. But we also have to maintain reliability. That heat wave that you both sat through last September in this very field also threatened our, blackouts on our grid.
Yeah.
And the last thing we want is, for the world to look at California's climate transition and say it creates blackouts. So it's got to be a transition. So I'm with you, Greg. It's not, and everybody plays their role, and we need to be pushed to move faster, but it does have to be a thoughtful transition.
And we have to listen to one another. Listen to each other's needs and so forth. I mean, that's one of the things of the conflicts about the elk. I mean, people want to tear down all the fences and let the elk just run all over. Well, we don't have the predator. They would grow, the population would grow. We don't have the predators. And I laugh because as soon as there were grizzly bears in your backyard or cougars again, those environmentalists would be the first to say, get them out of here. So they're going to eat my child, which they would. So again, who are we today and where are we and what can we do that's sustainable for all of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the framework in which I think we really have to think as we move forward on all these projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And hear each other too.
Yeah.
We've reintroduced wolves in California. And I think a lot of us who, are big biodiversity champions are really excited. Apex predator, remarkable story of recovery and resilience. We just found a pack in Tulare County.
I know.
Unbelievable
I read
and
about
exciting.
That.
Yeah, I think the wolves did it
Didn't
kind
the
of
mother,
themselves.
There was a mother with
but I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, but helping nature help us, help itself, right? But my point is, you also have ranchers in far northern Siskiyou, Shasta County that are concerned because they're out there and their livelihood is dependent on their cattle. And they see these animals as threatening that livelihood. That's real. I've never been a cattleman, but I know we have to listen to those concerns. And so our Fish and Wildlife Department has actually developed essentially a fund to compensate ranchers if, wolves kill cattle. So I think the point is, yes, we need to move fast. Yes, we need to, do all this stuff to restore nature. And we have to listen to everybody, bring folks along to the extent that we can.
Popularizing these ideas. I think 30 by 30 is a nice framework. Like we were talking before, you sort of look at a map by 30 by 30 and you've got these spots across California that seem disparate, that seem unconnected. I mean, to my mind, 30 by 30 makes a limited amount of sense if we're not talking about a 50 by 50.
Yeah.
Especially as far as like quality of habitat connectivity goes.
I hear you, Obi. And, we live in a state with 40 million people and it's the 5th largest economy in the world. And we can't create this from whole cloth.
No.
So the challenge is, how do we maintain strong enough vision?
Yes.
And then, be practical about what we're going to be able to achieve and how quickly we can implement it.
Right. And there's, I mean, I'm a man of statistics, Wade. It's like most of our endangered species don't live in protected areas. It's so weighted towards these low productive, high altitude elevations, for example.
Yeah.
And that's not where most of the endangered species are.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's this balance between the biodiversity and what these individual endangered species represent within their own ecosystems, within their own habitats.
Yeah.
And that is the technical problems with 30 by 30 are legion. And
but can I make it?
But what I want to just sort of make that as a point out there, and that's where I come at you guys today, like realizing that you both are not necessarily about that. Like, we're going to figure that out. And I have faith we're going to figure this out too.
Yeah, but also let me make a point on 30 by 30, but so much more about governmental policy, which is, the answers aren't found in Sacramento or Washington, D.C. We're not sitting in Sacramento with a big map and saying, these are the areas we're going to preserve for 30 by 30. What we're doing is raising a bunch of money and finding ways to support the local organizations that are doing that. The Mojave Land Trusts of the world, the Sonoma Land Trusts of the world. It's these experts in their regions,
yes,
including tribal communities and governments, that are identifying what are the priorities. And then it's not going to be perfect. But the idea is let's provide resources for different residents, communities across California to protect the most sensitive areas in their part of the state. And then, figure out where the gaps exist, where we need to plug in.
One thing I do want to say, and I think that's great, but again, my experience with nonprofits and others is a lot of times I just want to make sure that the money that you're giving, that they have to be accountable for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just going to be throwing money to tons of nonprofits and little organizations that will more or less accomplish the larger goals here that we have in mind.
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, because I've worked so much with, nonprofits, and as well-intentioned as most of them are, their ability often to accomplish their goals is limited. I don't want to see a lot of that money going, for example, to administration of these organizations.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So is there a template somewhere where so much of the money goes to this and then something that they have to be accountable? What are their goals, and do you have a way to measure that they've reached them?
Yeah.
Those are key, because the skeptic in me says, well, throw money to all these organizations, but how are you regulating what they're doing?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, we're working to hold ourselves accountable for spending that money, and then hold these organizations, whether it's a local government or a nonprofit, accountable. I hear you, Greg. I think we've made a lot of progress in government. I've spent most of my career in government. I've definitely seen situations where that doesn't exist. I'm hoping, in terms of all this environmental conservation work that we're doing, that we are holding ourselves accountable. And when we give somebody $3 million to, establish a conservation easement, that easement's going to be, established and protect those lands on a permanent basis.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to turn the tables on you guys and ask a question, which is, which I didn't get previous permission, but you spent over a year unpacking, all of this purpose and place, and, cultural restoration and environmental conservation. How optimistic are you that we're going to actually be able to achieve, collectively in the place we know as California, or more broadly, what we know we need to achieve?
You first.
Not an easy question.
So you're asking, let me be clear, Wade. You're asking, do you think we're going to achieve these goals?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's binary. Either we, achieve all the goals or we fail. But, Greg, you've been on such a remarkable journey in your life, with your tribe and establishing it as a federally recognized tribe, and then building its, strength and prosperity, and then doing all of these partnerships, recognizing everything you think we, need to do collectively. How optimistic that we're going to make the progress we need to?
Well, I think, again, what I would say, Wade, is that if we could do it, anyone could do it. So I am optimistic, but I don't even think that way. I just see I'm not as concerned as whether or not I'm going to win a race. I just want to keep running.
Yeah, I hear you.
So as long as I can keep running and I'm healthy and keep going and getting closer to that goal, that's enough.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think day to day. And and as you're running that race, you'll see things along the way that, this will help, that won't help. I'll make these connections, I won't make these connections. So I think it builds. And if you're doing the right good things, I think good is as contagious as a bad virus. So, and again, if the tribe we had nothing, absolutely nothing. And if you see certain opportunities, and when I again, and Obi knows this better than anyone else that we've talked to here, I'd never been in a casino, Wade. I didn't do any, but when, and I got the tribe its rights back, I co-authored the bill, I did all that, and I thought I was done. I would go back to academia and just write my books and teach my classes. But when the casino thing came up, I thought, oh my God, and I had that very elitist notion about casinos being déclassé and all that. But I saw the opportunity to do resources, and we did the unheard of thing. We created basically a mission statement, an agreement in the tribal council that I said, if I'm going to continue here, let whatever opportunities we have, first and foremost, take care of our people, but then become a platform for social justice and environmental stewardship. So that doing the right thing to help my people get our rights back became something else, which now is becoming something else, which ends up with me being a region and us sitting here talking, and all these kinds of things keep happening. So is that not optimistic?
Yeah.
That's wonderful, Greg.
That's a powerful proof point.
For me, just doing some napkin math in my head here, I think I've actually spent an equivalent amount of hours with both of you. You Wade, like camping and on the trail and that kind of thing, and Greg here 1 hour a month. We do some phone calls, but this is really like the quality time we get to sit and examine this idea, to keep these conversations going. So the quality of the discussions is a little bit different, but the quantity of the discussions is rather comparable between both of you. And what I really love about that quality between both of you, given their different forms, is that there are certain assumptions in your general disposition to your leadership styles. And there's something about the answers are out there still, and we're going to figure them out. We're going to figure out the Wheel of Fortune puzzle, even if we've only got a couple of N's and an R unveiled, we could figure out this puzzle. We could noodle that out. The solutions are out there. Let's keep going. What other choice do we have, right? And in this network of virulent climate anxiety, I see it in the children. Apparently, it's really, deleterious to most of like over 60% of our young people these days are like have their mental health impacted by this thing called climate anxiety. And this we talked about this in one episode, like these doomful heuristics where we are telling ourselves that we've got 10 years, we got 8 years, we got 8 minutes,
right?
Good luck making it till Tuesday, that kind of thing, which is so often the headline, right? If it bleeds, it leads. So that's the story that gets out there, as opposed to the story that's like, wait a minute, we're in a very complex system. See what's happened in the past 10 years since the shale revolution. Coal power plants have gone down so much that it looks like we've avoided catastrophic, like apocalyptic global warming by the year 2100. It looks like we've avoided. It's less than 4 degrees at this point because of the amount of coal reduction. Simply that, these market pressures have done something that the governments didn't expect, right? So these are these complex emergent phenomena that are impossible to predict, and actually lay out a mathematical matrix, if you will, that points equally towards failure and success. There's no reason to think that we're doomed, but there's also no reason to think that we're going to succeed through this bottleneck either. And pushing forward, greater understanding, greater clarity, greater transparency. What do we have? We have nothing but conversation. We either have conversation or we have war, right? So let's keep the conversation going.
Well, another way to maybe, as I've said this before here, Obi, I try not to think about, because you can get preoccupied with, you don't know what's going to happen. All I know is that I just saw a swallowtail go by. I see tons of hummingbirds. They're doing their thing. Damn it, I'm sitting here. I got to do mine. That's the least I can do, my part.
Yeah. And I think people,
that's beautiful.
I think at this stage in time, a lot of people are woken up to the challenges we face. And if you live in California, it's remarkable. All the public polling suggests vast majorities of Californians understand the impacts of climate change in their lives. So I think people are alarmed and in many cases scared.
Yeah.
So I think part of what we need to do as leaders is, yes, be clear-eyed about those challenges and communicate them, but then also demonstrate progress and show what we're doing. I mean, I'm with Greg. I'm going to run the race as long as I can.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to be here for all that long. And certainly me and my job, I'm going to be here for like a blink more. I'm going to run as fast as I can because there's no choice. And let's show the progress.
Let's show the progress.
Because I got to say, our young people need it. I mean,
and wait, let's show great examples. I think, again, if I can, now that I'm done talking about Grayton, let me talk about Grayton. So, I mean, I think, again, we have provided, and one of the things I like so much is providing models or blueprints for how to do things. And again, whether it's taking care of your people, taking care of your employees, all of that sort of thing, these are models that are sustainable and relationships that make for sustainability. It can be done. People are doing it. Look to those, enhance those.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
you two again are here planting seeds for others, around yourselves as the administrators, the leaders that you are. And here I am thinking of this Nietzsche quote that pops into my head, that all great people are actors towards their own ideals. Right. How do I foster the voice, the ambition, the arrogance in myself, being a man of a particular economic demographic, a particular racial background, a particular sexual orientation, like all of these things that I'm sort of like my software is equipped with on a personal level as an artist. What is the nature of my voice to serve? And ultimately what I think that is, or what I'm working on anyway, is figuring it out. And the it is how to be more from this place, how to respect these more than human systems, learning about them again and again. My books can't get big enough.
Well, I will say this, Obi, on that spectrum, you are one of the most reflective people I've met in my life, and prodigious. I can't believe you got another book coming out. It's like this guy produces a book like every month, and they're gorgeous and they're huge. It's
not quite every month. Thank you, Wade. Thank you so much.
Unbelievable.
The book I'm writing right now, the 6th book in the California Field Atlas series, which is The State of Fire, Understanding Where, How, and Why California Burns, is my greatest challenge. I burn with California, and everything in that discussion seems to be attached to everything else. Noodling that out, that story out.
Yeah.
And that's why there's not a lot of books on it. There's not a lot of books on California fire.
Well,
there are less than you would think. Go to Barnes & Noble and try and find a book on California fire.
Yeah.
It does.
Well, and you're going to do it in a way that nobody else does it. But I'll tell you this, to me, it's like, how do we connect? You got so many listeners that are in their own way, on their path, right? And everybody plays their role. How do we connect more people that are doing good things together? I mean, Greg,
That's right.
That's
said
what
before
we're talking about.
I said before, I mean, I've wanted to meet you for the last, 3 years I've been in this role. And now that we have this connection, it's thinking about, okay, now we have connective tissue and our allies in this area. So, how do we build this self-reinforcing network where we're all charging down the field, doing different things, but creating that situation that, that template that greatness has created actually becomes the norm. Right.
And I pitched it to you. I said, regarding state parks, let's institutionalize something with tribal peoples to co-manage. I mean, let's do something like that. So again, this meeting even here today could come to something.
Yeah, I'm hoping it does.
So, but that's it. I'm also, I guess, at a basic level, Wade and Obi, you probably, I'm an operator. I figure these are the things that are on my mind, and I'm always my eyes are open and going, okay, well, Wade's going to be here. I can ask him this, and he can do this.
Yeah.
And likewise, you could do the same to me. But that's what you're always doing as a leader. You're looking for connections that will further your goals and make them larger and more influential. That's what people do in a bad way, but you can certainly do it in a good way.
That's interesting. That's interesting to me. Yeah, that utility of conversation. I didn't have that today. I lost some sleep last night thinking about this conversation this morning, because this is a new format, this triangle of discourse, this luxuriating time span that we have, 90 minutes to sit down and talk with you guys, not necessarily about granular problems, although I think that we made some progress in some of those things, especially Greg's specific pitch there, which is just poetry, but but the idea of what a leadership style is, how decisions get made in a democratic context, I think is probably the best thing that we could have done.
Yeah.
Well, and let us, before I forget, I do have to do a footnote here, or a head note. And let us not forget that the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria are sponsoring this podship.
Yes.
Let's start there.
Yeah, let's start there.
Let's not forget.
Yes. Yeah. And that's another example of where your government's creating a template.
Yes.
And I love this grand experiment that is your podcast, where you're bringing together two big thinkers in very different ways, and you're spending time with each other and unpacking these. And then this season, you're bringing in, a third person, each of these, to be able to riff off and join the conversation. So there should be more of these types of conversations.
I'm so grateful to the tribe.
I agree.
For this.
I agree. And it's, for me, the last year with Obi and now with the new format, is stimulating. I mean, it's just very stimulating. I walk away thinking, of course, I walk away as I used to leave lectures and classes thinking, I should have said this, and I should have brought up this, and I should have. You always leave thinking about the things you. I'm sure you do the same thing, Obi.
But it is nutritive. I mean, it really is. It feeds us. Sponsored by the Bay Laurel trees as well. We wouldn't be here without them. As we say goodbye to year 2, episode 2 of Place and Purpose here, we do have a winner. We have a winner.
Oh, no questions?
Oh, we do have a couple of questions. Let's go. We do have questions. Look at these questions. Okay. So we've got one one of my pet peeves. How do we get rid of Mylar balloons in California? Pretty specific question from one of our audience members here. So Mylar balloons, gosh, they're everywhere. I mean, the plastic problem in general is.
We could have a whole episode.
They've landed up on the mountain.
Oh, they're everywhere. I can find them out.
That's a good. We have 120 legislators in Sacramento, many of whom are strong environmentalists, and that would be, if it hasn't already been a good suggestion for a law change, would be a very good suggestion for a law change.
That's another pitch. Who do we go to? We got Mike McGuire in this area. You just go right to the people.
Yeah,
right to your legislators.
That's the best answer. That's the best answer. And then the next.
And I'll have Wade behind me when I go.
The next very broad question we have from Michael here is, where's the discussion with citizens using less energy in the future?
Well, totally. Let me just say that, we talk about megawatts. We really need to talk about negawatts. In other words, the energy that we didn't use, that's good. The products that we didn't consume, the packaging that we didn't consume. It's the single most cost-effective way we can combat climate change.
Sure.
So it's energy efficiency, it's water efficiency, it's conservation. So I would say California is historically a leader in this. The average Californian utilizes about half the energy of the average American, and that's because our government leaders put in place building standards and appliance standards for efficiency. But there's a lot more that we can do.
And ultimately, again, and nobody likes to hear this, and this is a big one, is again, we have to begin compromising our lifestyle, the amount that we eat, take, do. Being here costs nothing. There's beautiful ways to do things, but the amount of meat we consume, the places we go, those are all, there's compromises we're going to have to make in our lifestyle, all of us.
Yeah.
We have a winner, the September giveaway. If you go to placeandpurpose.live and sign up, register your email, you can enter a contest for a free book from Wade and myself, signed to you. And our winner this month is Andrew Darling.
Wow!
Congrats, Andrew.
I know.
Congrats.
My in-laws are
Andrew.
my in-laws are the Darling family, and I don't know an Andrew Darling. I don't think you're related.
Well, now you do.
Yeah, you do. Yes.
In any case, Wade, thank you so much for making the time.
Oh,
Thank you, Wade. It's a great morning.
I'm thrilled to be here with you guys. It's great to actually be on top of this mountain with you both in conversation.
Our next guest on Place and Purpose is the great Rebecca Solnit. And so, folks at home, your homework this month is to go get a copy of Orwell's Roses and read this book.
She's incredible.
Yeah, she is incredible
in her own right.
Oh, yeah, amazing. So we're going to welcome her next month. And thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.
Until next time.
Until next time.
All right. Be well.
Okay.
Thanks.